Om Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtavrayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So continuing with the discussion on Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, chapter 10, the Lord's return to Jagannath Puri, text 170 onwards. So there was discussion going on between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Brahmanand Bharati. And then they asked Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to mediate and tell the truth. What's the tattva? So Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is saying, Suvarna Varna Hemango Varangas Chandan Angadi Sanyas Krichama Shanto Nishtha Shanti Parayana. His bodily hue is golden and his whole body is like molten gold. Every part of his body is very beautifully constructed and smeared with sandalwood pearl. Accepting the renounced order, the Lord is always equipoised. He is firmly fixed in his mission of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, and he is firmly situated in his dualistic conclusion and in his peace. This is quote from Mahabharata, Vishnu Sahasranam Stotra. This is about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Ei sab naame riha hai nijas padha, chandan nakta prasad dora shri bhuje angada. All the symptoms mentioned in the words from Vishnu Sahasranam Stotra are visible in the body of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His arms are decorated with sandalwood pulp and the thread received from Sri Jagannath deity, and these are his ornamental bangles. Bhattacharya kahe Bharati dekhi tomar jaye, Prabhu kahe ye kaha sahi satya hai. After hearing this, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya rendered his judgment, saying, Brahmanan Bharati, I see that you are victorious. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu immediately said, I accept whatever Brahmanan Bharati had said. It is quite all right. So what he had said, that there are two Brahmans, Jagannath is one Brahman and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is another Brahman. Although Jagannath ji is immobile and Mahaprabhu is moving Brahman. So Mahaprabhu was like, no, a jiva cannot be compared to the Lord. But devotees know the real story of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Guru Shishya Nyaya Satya Shishya Parajaya Bharati Kahe Ho Nahe Anya Hetu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu thus posed himself as a disciple and accepted Brahmanan Bharati as a spiritual master. He then said, the disciple is certainly defeated in an argument with the spiritual master. Brahmanan Bharati immediately countered these words, saying, this is not the cause of your defeat. There is another cause. Bhakta thahi hara tumi eto mara subhava. Ara eka shuna tumi apana parabhav. It is your natural characteristic to accept defeat at the hands of a devotee. There is also another glory of yours, which I ask you to hear attentively. Ajanma karyu mui nirakar dhyan, toma dekhi Krishna haila mora vidyaman. I have been meditating on the impersonal Brahman since my birth, but since I have seen you, I have fully experienced Krishna. So Brahman and Bharati admitted that when there is an argument between the spiritual master and the disciple, the spiritual master is naturally victorious, although the disciple may put forward a strong argument. In other words, it is customary that the words of the spiritual master are more worshipable than the words of a disciple. Under the circumstances, and Brahmanan Bharati was in the position of a spiritual master, he emerged victorious over Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who considered himself Brahmanan Bharati's disciple. However, Brahmanan Bharati reversed the argument and took the position of a devotee, stating that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. This means that the Lord was voluntarily defeated out of affection for his devotee. So out of affection for his devotee, Mahaprabhu accepted the defeat. This is what Brahmanan Bharati is. He was defeated voluntarily because no one can defeat the Supreme Lord. Concerning this, the words of Bhishma and Srimad Bhagavatam are important. Fulfilling my desire and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel, and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way. And this is how Krishna favors his devotees. Krishna promised not to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra, but Bhishma, in order to break Krishna's promise, attacked Arjuna in such a vigorous way that Krishna was obliged to take up a chariot wheel and attack Bhishma. The Lord this to show that his devotee was being maintained at the sacrifice of his own promise. Brahmanan Bharati said, since the beginning of my life, I was attached to impersonal Brahman realization. But as soon as I saw you, I became very much attached to the personality of Godhead, Krishna. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Lord Krishna himself, and thus Brahmanan Bharati became his devotee. So although in the beginning he was attached to impersonal Brahman realization, but Mahaprabhu's association changed his heart. Krishna nama Surya Mukhe Mane Netra Krishna Toma Ke Tad Rupa Dekhi Hridaye Satrishna. Brahmanan Bharati continued, since I have seen you, I have been feeling Lord Krishna's presence in my mind and have been seeing him before my eyes. I now want to chant the holy name of Lord Krishna. Over and above this, within my heart, I consider you to be Krishna, and I am therefore very eager to serve you. Bilu Mangal Kaila Yache Dasha Apanara Iha Deki Sei Daso Aila Amara. Bilmangal Thakur abandoned his impersonal realization for the realization of the personality of Godhead. I now see that my condition is similar to his, for it has already changed. In his early life, Bilmangal Thakur was an impersonalistic monist, and he used to meditate upon the impersonal Brahman effulgence. Later, he became a devotee of Lord Krishna, and his explanation for this change is given in verse that is quoted in Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu. Sometimes a devotee gradually comes to the stage of Bhagwan realization of the Supreme Person after having attained the lower stages of realization, impersonal Brahman and localized Paramatma realizations. The condition of such a devotee is described in Chaitanya Chandramrita by Prabodhanand Saraswati. And he says, Kavalyam Narakayate. Kavalya. Kavalya means oneness in the effulgence of Brahman appears hellish to the devotee. The heavenly planets, the abodes of the demigods, appear to devotee like phantasmagoria. Phantasmagoria means Akasha Pushpayate, flower in the sky, which has no existence actually. The yogis meditate for sense control, but for the devotee, the senses appear like serpents with broken teeth. The devotee doesn't have to control his senses, for his senses are always already engaged in his Lord's service. Consequently, there is no possibility that the senses will act like serpents. In the material condition, the senses are as strong as poisonous snakes. But when the senses are engaged in the Lord's service, they are like poisonous snakes with their fangs removed, and so they are no longer dangerous. The entire world is a replica of Vaikuntha for the devotee because he has no anxiety. Vaikuntha means no anxiety, Vikatakuntha. Material world is full of anxiety. But for a devotee, he has no anxiety. He sees that everything belongs to Krishna and he does not want to enjoy anything for himself. He doesn't even aspire for the position of Lord Brahma or Indra. He simply wants to engage everything in the service of the Lord. Therefore, he has no problem. So for himself, he has no problem. He just wants to serve the Lord. That's it. He stands in his original constitutional position. All this is possible when one receives Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's merciful glance. So yet the karunya kataksha vaibhavatam tam goram evastuma. So only by the merciful glance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this is possible for a devotee, because he always thinks, he always says, on my own, I cannot do anything. Everything is by mercy of Guru and Krishna. In the Chaitanya Chandramrita, there are more verses illustrating the same principle. So a discussion of the impersonal Brahman is not very palatable to a devotee. The so-called regulations of the Shastras also appear null and void to him. There are many people who argue over the Shastra, but for a devotee, such discussions are but tumultuous rolling. By the influence of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all these problems disappear. And the whole Krishna Bhakti, Krishna Seva, that just develops in his heart. Advaita Vithi Patike Rupaseya, Swananda Simhasana Labda Diksha. Shatena Kenapi Vayam Mahatena, Dasi Krita Gopa Vadhu Vitena. Brahmanand Bharti concluded, although I was worshipped by those on the path of monism, so monism means one, or Advait, one, and initiated into self-realization through the yoga system, I have nonetheless been forcibly turned into a maidservant by some cunning boy who's always joking with the gopis. This is a verse written by Bilwangal Thakur. It was quoted in Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu. Prabhu kahe Krishna tomar gaढ़ prema hai. Yahan netra pade tahan Shri Krishna spuraya. Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, you have a deep ecstatic love for Krishna. Therefore, wherever you turn your eyes, you simply heighten your Krishna consciousness. Bhattacharya kahe doha sustaya vachan. Aage yadi Krishna dena sakshat darshan. Sarvam Bhattacharya said the statements of both of you are correct. Krishna gives direct audience through his mercy. Prema vina kabu nahe tare sakshatkara. Ihara kripate hai darshana ihara. Without having ecstatic love for Krishna, one cannot see him directly. Therefore, through the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Brahmanand Bharti has acquired direct vision of the Lord. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you are Brahmanand Bharti, an advanced devotee who ecstatically loves the Supreme Lord. Therefore, you see Krishna everywhere, and there is no doubt about it. Sarvam Bhattacharya was a mediator between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Brahmanand Bharti, and his judgment was that an advanced devotee like Brahmanand Bharti was seeing Krishna by Krishna's mercy. Krishna directly presents himself before the vision of an advanced devotee. Since Brahmanand Bharti was an advanced devotee, he saw Krishna in the person of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this is only possible as it said in the words of Brahma Samhita, I worship the primeval Lord Govinda, who is always seen by the devotee, whose eyes are anointed with the pulp of love. He is seen in his eternal form of Shamsundar, situated within the heart of the devotee. So that's the only way to see him. And Brahmanan Bharati could see Mahaprabhu as Krishna because his eyes are smeared with ointment of love. प्रभु कहे विष्णु विष्णु की कहा सार्वभौम अति स्तुति है निंदार लक्षण. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Sarvam Bhattacharya, what are you saying? Lord Vishnu, save me. Such glorification is simply another form of blasphemy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a little embarrassed by Bhattacharya's statement. Therefore, he uttered the name Vishnu to save himself. The Lord herein confirms that if one is overestimated, glorification is just another form of blasphemy. In this way, he protests this so-called offensive state. So one thing he wanted to make sure that people follow, that they don't call anybody as Supreme Lord. Of course, he himself is Supreme Lord, but he was acting as a devotee. So he didn't want to be called Krishna, and he wanted everybody to understand that we should not be just calling anybody and everybody as Supreme Lord. एतबली भारती लया निज वास आईला भारती गोसाई प्रभु निकटे रहीला. After saying this, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took Brahmanand Bharati with him to his residence. From that time on, Brahmanand Bharati remained with Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Ramabhadracharya Bhagavanacharya Prabhu Pade Rahila Duhe Chadi Sarvakarya. Later, Rambhadracharya and Bhagavanacharya joined them and, giving up all other responsibilities, remained under Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's shelter. Kashishwar Gosai Aila Aradine Sammana Kariya Prabhu Rakhila Nijasthane. The next day, Kashishwar Goswami also came and remained with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who received him with great respect. प्रभु के लया कराया ईश्वर दर्शन आगे लोक भीड़ सब करी निवारण. Kashishwar used to usher Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu into the Jagannath temple. He would precede the Lord into the crowd and keep the people from touching him. So we know that we have the experience of the crowd at Jagannath temple. And Kashishwar used to protect Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when Mahaprabhu was in Jagannath temple. Yat nad nadi yaiche samudre milaya aiche Mahaprabhur bhakta yaha taha haya. As all the rivers flow into the sea, all the devotees throughout the country finally came to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's shelter. Sabe asi milila Prabhur Shri Charane Prabhu Kripa Kari Sabai Rakhila Nijasthane. Since all the devotees came to him for shelter, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showed them all mercy and kept them under his protection. Eita kahila Prabhu Vaishnava Milana Iha Yeshu Nipaye Chaitanya Charana. Thus I have described the meeting of all the Vaishnavas with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Whoever hears this description ultimately attains shelter at his lotus feet. So hopefully someday we'll also get shelter at his lotus feet. Shri Rupa Raghunath Pade Jar Asha Chaitanya Charita Mrita Kahe Krishna Dasa. Praying at the lotus feet of Shri Rupa and Shri Raghunath, always desiring their mercy, I, Krishnadas, narrate Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita, following in the footsteps. So thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purpose of Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, 10th chapter, describing the Lord's meeting the Vaishnavas upon his return to Jagannath Puri from South India. So since we have time, we can start next chapter, chapter 11, the Beda Kirtan pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what is Beda Kirtan? So that happened during Lord Jagannath's Rath Yatra. Text 1. Ati utandam tandavam Gaurachandra kurvan bhakta Shri Jagannath gehe Nana bhavalang kritangah sudhamna chakre vishwam prema vanya nimagnam. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu merged the entire world into the ocean of ecstatic love by performing his beautiful dances within the temple of Jagannath. He danced exquisitely and jumped high. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. All glories to Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, all glories to Lord Nityananda Prabhu, all glories to Shri Advaita Prabhu, and all glories to all the devotees of Shri Chaitanya Prabhu. और आर दिन सार्वभौम कहे प्रभु स्थाने अभय दान देह यदि करि निवेदन. The next day, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya requested Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to give him permission to submit a statement without fear. प्रभु कहे कहा तुमी नाही किछु भाई योग्य हाइले करीबा अयोग्य हाइले नाहि. The Lord gave the Bhattacharya assurance that he could speak without fear, but added that if his statement was suitable, he would accept it, and if it were not, he would reject it. सार्वभौम कहे प्रताप रुद्र राय उत्कंठा हया चेतोमा मिली बारे चाय. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya said, there is a king named Pratap Rudra Rai. He is very anxious to meet you and he wants your permission. Karne hasta diya Prabhu smare Narayan Sarvabhauma kaha kena ayogya vachan. As soon as Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard this proposal, he immediately covered his ears with his hands and said, my dear Sarvabhauma, why are you requesting such an undesirable thing from me? Virakta sannyasi amar raja darshan, stri darshan sama vishera bhakshan. Since I am in the renounce order, it is as dangerous for me to meet a king as to meet a woman. To meet either would be just like drinking poison. So he was so strict. As a sannyasi, he said, I cannot meet the king. And it's as dangerous as meeting a woman. Nishkinanchanasya bhagvat bhajanonumukhasya param param jigam se jiga mishora bhava sagarasya sandarshanam vishayinam athayoshitam cha ha hanta hanta vishwabhakshanato api asadhu. Greatly lamenting, the Lord then informs Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, alas, for a person who is seriously desiring to cross the material ocean and engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord without material motives, seeing a materialist engaged in sense gratification or seeing a woman who is similarly interested is more abominable than drinking poison willingly. Wow. This is a quotation from Sri Chaitanya Chandrodaya Natak. Thus Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu enunciates the principles for a sannyasi renouncing the material world for spiritual advancement. Spiritual advancement is not meant for magic shows and jugglery, but for crossing the material world and being transferred to the spiritual world. So this is the only reason or the criteria for spiritual advancement. Nothing else. Param jigamisho. Oh. I got kicked out. Parambaram Jigamisho means desiring to go to the other side of the material world. There's a river called Vaitarani, and on one side of this river is the material world, and on the other side is the spiritual world. Since the Vaitarani river is compared to a great ocean, it is named a Bhavasagar. the ocean of repeated birth and death. Spiritual life aims at stopping this repetition of birth and death and entering into the spiritual world where one can live eternally, cognizant and blissful. So Sat, Chit and Anand. So that is the whole purpose of spiritual life. Unfortunately, the general populace does not know anything about spiritual life or the spiritual world. The spiritual world is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, Parastasmat bhavu anyam. Yet there is another unmanifested nature which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. So spiritual world is eternal. It's never going to be annihilated. Although Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, yet there is another unmanifested nature. So that is unmanifested for conditioned souls like us. Otherwise, it's manifested, very much manifested, very much eternal, eternally present. But for us, it is unmanifest. Thus, there is a spiritual nature beyond this material world, and that spiritual nature exists eternally. Spiritual advancement means stopping material activities and entering into spiritual activities. This is the process of bhakti. In the material world, the via media for sense gratification is mainly a woman. One who is seriously interested in spiritual life should strictly avoid women. A sannyasi should never see a man or a woman for material benefit. In addition, talks with materialistic men and women are also dangerous, and they are compared to drinking poison. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very strict on this point. He therefore refused to see King Pratap Rudra, who was naturally always engaged in political and economic affairs. So, as a king, he had to be engaged in all these affairs of this kingdom. The Lord even refused to see the king despite the request of a personality like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was the Lord's intimate friend and a devotee. Still, Mahaprabhu would not budge. Sarvabhauma kahe satya tomar vachanam, Jagannath sevak raja kintu bhakta uttam. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya replied, my dear Lord, what you have said is correct, but this king is not an ordinary king. He is a great devotee and servant of Lord Jagannath. Prabhu kahe tathapi raja kala sarpakara, kashtha nari sparsha yaiche upaje vikara. The Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, although it is correct that the king is a great devotee, but he is still to be considered a venomous snake, poisonous snake. Similarly, even though a woman be made of wood, one becomes agitated simply by touching her form. Mahaprabhu is really strict. Sri Chanakya Pandit has stated in his moral instructions, Tyaj Durjan Samsargam Bhaj Sadhu Samagama. This means that one has to abandon the association of materialistic people and associate with spiritually advanced people. However qualified a materialist may be, he is no better than a venomous serpent. Everyone knows that a snake is dangerous and poisonous, and when his hood is decorated with jewels, it is no less poisonous or dangerous. However qualified a materialist may be, he is no better than a snake decorated with jewels. One should therefore be careful in dealing with such materialists, just as one would be careful in dealing with a bejeweled serpent. Wow. Heavy, very heavy. But for preaching purposes, we always have to come in contact and deal with materialistic people. Because otherwise, how are we going to even attempt to transform the heart? if you don't associate or come in contact and preach people. Even though a woman be made of wood or stone, she becomes attractive and decorated. One becomes sexually agitated even by touching the phone. Therefore, one should not trust his mind, which is so fickle that it can give way to enemies at any moment. The mind is always accompanied by six enemies, namely Kama, Krodha, Mad, Moha, Matsarya, and Bhaya. That is lust, anger, intoxication, illusion, envy, and fear. Although the mind may be merged in spiritual consciousness, one should always be very careful in dealing with it, just as one is careful in dealing with a snake. So, mind, I believe in Bhagavatam it is said, example is given that an expert hunter, when he catches an animal or a bird, so but he, although he has caught it, but he makes sure he either puts a cap on whatever, or he has tied up the sack in which the animal is, the bird is kept, so that it doesn't fly away. So the example is given, so we learn that although for some time we have controlled the mind in bhakti process, but an expert devotee makes sure the mind doesn't get diverted again or get distracted again by by these items of illusion. So one should be very careful in dealing with it. That's what I say. Although the mind may be merged in spiritual consciousness, one should always be very careful in dealing with it, just as one is careful in dealing with a snake. One should never think that his mind is trained and that he can do whatever he likes. One interested in spiritual life should always engage his mind in the service of the Lord, so that the enemies of the mind who always accompany the mind will be subdued. So enemies are Kama, Krodha, Madhya, Moha, Matsarya, and Bhaya. And of all these enemies, of course, the first one, Kam. Everything starts with Kam. And Kam means to enjoy myself. And this is, mind think this is my best friend, but actually it's the worst enemy. If the mind is not engaged in Krishna consciousness, at every moment there is a chance that it will give way to its enemies. In this way, we become victims of the mind. Chanting the Hare Krishna mantra engages the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna constantly. Thus, the mind's enemies do not have a chance to strike. Following Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's example in these verses, we should be very careful in dealing with the mind. We should not be indulged in any circumstance. Once we indulge the mind, it can create havoc in this life, even though we may be spiritually advanced. The mind is specifically agitated through the association of materialistic men and women. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, through his personal behavior, wants everyone to avoid meeting a materialistic person or a woman. So Mahaprabhu set the best standard for all us to follow. Akarad abhi bhetavyam strinam vishainam abhi yatha aher manasa kshavas tatha tasya kriterapi. Just as one is immediately frightened upon seeing a live serpent or even the form of a serpent, one endeavoring for self-realization should similarly fear a materialistic person and a woman. Indeed, he should not even glance at their worldly features. This is a quotation from Sri Chaitanya Chandrodaya Natak. ऐचे बात पुनरापि मुखे न आनीबे, कहा यदि तबे आमाए तना देखीबे. Bhattacharya, if you continue to speak like this, you will never see me here again. Therefore, you should never let such a request come from your mouth. So Mahaprabhu is telling Bhattacharya, don't even say this again if you want to see me here. Because Mahaprabhu was ready to leave Jagannath Puri. He was so cautious about all these rules. भय पाय सार्वभौम निज घर गेला, वासाय गिय Bhattacharya चिंतित हैला. Being afraid, Sarvabhauma returned home and began to meditate on the matter. Hena kale pratap rudra purushottame ail, patra mitra sange raja darshane chali. At this time, Maharaj Pratap Rudra arrived at Jagannath Puri Purushottam and accompanied by his secretaries, ministers and military officers went to visit the temple of Lord Jagannath. It appears that Maharaj Pratap Rudra used to live at Cuttack, his capital. Later he shifted his capital to Khurda, a few miles from Jagannath Puri. Presently there is a railway station there called Khurda Road. I guess I can stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments?
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु जी. प्रभु जी, हम लोग गए थे क्या खुर्दा रोड? सुना हुआ लग रहा है.
खुर्दा क्रॉस किया था when we went
किया
to
था ना.
जब नील माधव के लिए गए थे ना.
ओके. हाँ, मुझे लगा सुन देखा है, यहाँ गए थे वो जगह.
या खुर्दा क्रॉस किया था
ना. थैंक यू प्रभु जी.
Thank you
सो मच.
चलो, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Shri
हरे कृष्णा. जय श्री प्रभुपाद.